I want to bring in MS Now's Jake Traylor at the White House. Peter Baker is chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and an MS Now contributor. And Stuart Stevens is senior advisor to the Lincoln Project and was chief strategist for Mitt Romney's 2012 campaign. Good to have all of you here. Peter, the Times polling, most of which was done after Trump made his remarks about Americans' financial struggles, show overwhelmingly that people want him focused on them. They're clearly unhappy he isn't. Is there nothing that pushes him to think that he's in a losing proposition?
Well, it's remarkable because these numbers show how weak he is, even on areas he has traditionally been strong, right? A lot of Americans might not like all of his policies, but many of them did like, for a while at least, his policies on immigration. A lot of them did like, for a while, his policies on the economy. They believed his, pitch that he was the great economic president and that he would bring back jobs and get rid of inflation and do all these things. And the polls show that most Americans don't buy that anymore. And even Republicans, many Republicans who voted for him, like that caller, have lost faith that he really is focused on their issues. Inflation is higher than it was when he came into office. Job growth has plummeted since he took office. And obviously the price of gas and other things are causing a lot of hardship at home. And you see these numbers that reflect not just Democrats, independents who already were predisposed not to like him, but a lot of Republicans, not all, not a majority even necessarily, but a lot of Republicans have lost faith.
And Stuart, President Trump actually doubled down on Friday and said his statement about not focusing on Americans' economic concerns again was a perfect statement, and he'd say it again. But among independents, only 17% describe economic conditions as excellent or good. Just 25% think the country is on the right track. So if you're in a competitive race and you're a Republican, at what point do you conclude that sticking with Trump is more dangerous to your political career than breaking away?
Yeah, it's fascinating because you have these two dynamics. You have sort of the non-hardcore Republican world, and we're seeing people like Cassidy losing. Cornyn's probably going to lose. This is triumphed as, the power that Trump has over the party. And when Lindsey Graham went out this weekend and said Donald Trump is the Republican Party. Well, I wrote a book called It Was All a Lie, How the Republican Party Became Donald Trump. It is Donald Trump. There is no anti-Trump party. But you have the rest of the world. And you look at these numbers, and it's just as clear as can be. He's losing on every issue. And at a certain point in politics, you need to be for something that people like. And he's just not. And the classic way to correct here is that standard play. You go, we've made mistakes, but we've listened, and we're going to change. And Americans are predisposed to give people a second chance, but you kind of have to show that you're trying. You kind of have to go to Betty Ford to say, okay, I'm going to quit. You can't just stay at the bar and say, I'm going to quit. And Trump's incapable of doing that. And so he doubles down, like you say. And this places Republican candidates in this box that really is unique in American modern politics because you've never had a leader of a party who will punish those, even if it hurts himself, that try to say what they need to say to get elected. So it's a real problem for Republicans.
And Peter, the last line in today's article that broke down the poll said something I thought was fascinating. It says, in the polling era, there are no examples of the president's party retaining the White House when the president's approval rating is under 40%. Again, Trump's is at 37. And then it said, quote, more often, the election is a rout. Now, it's obviously early, but does the math add up for the Republican Party if they're hoping to retain power, not just in 2026, but potentially even in 28?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot can happen between now and 2028. We'll see. But it's really hard to dig out of a hole once you're in it, to Stuart's point. With the general public, when they have made up their minds, it's really hard to give them new information to reevaluate their position, especially if you're not going to do what Stuart was just talking about, which is to, offer some sort of a mea culpa and a change plan. At this point, they know who Donald Trump is. They have known him now for 10 years on the political stage. It's not easy to reinvent your image to gain back the support that you've lost. Now, we'll see if the economy were suddenly to surge, if the war were over, obviously you have to allow for that possibility, and that could change the political dynamics. But there are Republicans right now who are, as you say, looking at 2028 with a real dark vision right now, because it's not, historically likely to be able to hold on to the White House in a time where the incumbent is so unpopular. That's what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris discovered in some ways. Kamala Harris was the new figure, but she couldn't distance herself from the incumbent, who had lost a lot of support among the public. And whoever's running on, Trump's record here, whether it be J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or somebody else, they're going to have to own and explain that record. And that's going to be a challenge, it looks like, according to today's polls.
Jake, are you getting any sense that the White House is feeling the pressure from these polls?
Yeah, I mean, look, Chris, they are feeling it, but they're remedying it with another poll. That's the voting polls. I was just talking with a White House official who's familiar with the White House's campaign strategy in the midterms, and they said that as these approval ratings really just show the president in the tank right now, that his focus has been on some of these primary elections where one by one he's been ticking off any challenger within his own Republican Party. The latest example of that, of course, was Bill Cassidy over the weekend. The most recent future look at that is Thomas Massie in Kentucky. This White House official told me that's the polling that the president's been looking at right now, is his continued victories within the Republican Party, not as much of a focus on the general. And whenever we talk about this, too, I was just speaking with another White House official who continues to make the argument that this is short term, that there is a plan to pivot. Of course, the ongoing war with Iran, as it goes much farther than the White House initially predicted, is the issue they're facing, as Peter mentioned there, that they're continuing to dig a hole here. As we do look at some of this polling, this new New York Times polling, job as president, 37% approval rating for the president. When it comes to his handling of the economy, 33% approving. Cost of living, 28% approval. Whenever I talk to White House officials about these just really stark numbers, they say the president is focused on the primaries right now. In terms of their political strategy and outlook, they are intending, in terms of midterm strategy, to focus on the big, beautiful bill. That is what they say is going to be the going home, send home message, is to focus on the big, beautiful bill, tax cuts that come out of that. The problem, of course, though, is that what leaks into that is the way that Americans are feeling about the economy, feeling at the gas pump and the grocery stores right now. And despite the focused desire to be on the big, beautiful bill, it's getting crowded out by the star of the show, which is the affordability crisis in the country right now.
Yeah, Stuart, at the same time, we're seeing Democrats having a tough time turning all of this dissatisfaction into clear support. Look at the New York Times poll. 70% of voters are dissatisfied with the Democratic Party. That includes 44% of Democrats themselves. Should that at least temper their expectations for November?
Yeah, if I ran the Democratic Party, I would just shut up about the Democratic Party. I think we've had two interesting tests in November with Virginia governor's race and New Jersey governor's race. So the Democratic numbers were in the party numbers were in the tank, and the candidates won by 10 points, which in those states is a really big margin. I've helped elect Republican governors in both those states. I don't think anybody likes any of our parties, which is why independents are the fastest growing group. So this idea that you're going to defend the party is an unnecessary burden. This is the most simple race that you can imagine. It's like you've got a choice. If you like the way the things are going, fine, vote for Republican. If you don't, here's another chance. Let's send them a message. And Democrats need to not make that a speed bump sort of that you have to get over. Well, that means I've got to be for X or Y. Enough to say, send them a message, we're an alternative. And, every election we've had since 2016 has been a change election. When Trump won, it was a change election. When Biden won, it was a change election. When Trump won again, it was a change election. And the number that we don't talk enough about is the right track of the country. And it's about 25% now. And that question, do you think the country's going the right track or wrong track? And an incumbent party, just as it's never won when the president's approval was under 40, but an even more stark number is incumbent parties never won when the right track was under 45. And look, it's at 25 now. That's a real problem. And it's not a problem that's going to solve itself very easily.
Peter, it is always a difficult proposition to try to figure out what's in President Trump's heads. But the posts yesterday that we showed, including things we haven't seen before, like the AI stuff with the alien, the Wall Street Journal recently said his posts over the course of many months are a window into Trump's mind. If that is the case, what do you see?
Well, I mean, I think, look, he has always been somebody who is unconventional, let's say, unorthodox. He likes to stroke his own ego with these images of him as a Jedi warrior, as James Bond, even as the Pope, right, as Jesus Christ, which got him in trouble just a few weeks ago. He favors social media conspiracy theories. He favors outright, falsehoods on these social media posts. He seems absorbed with his own image and his own name. Why is he putting his name on buildings? And he's putting his signature on the currency. He's putting his face on national park tickets and on coins. Everything for Donald Trump is about Donald Trump at this point. And I think this speaks to your question about the polls, because a lot of people out there who like Donald Trump want him to focus on them and their issues, not on him and his satisfaction. And we'll talk about this compensation fund he's about to start, where he's going to pay his supporters using taxpayer money soon. But the image he is sending with these posts, the message he is sending with his political priorities, is often to many voters about himself rather than about them.